Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. We're speaking on the Friday in the wake of this Roe decision that we've all been expecting. And David, as you were saying off mic, like this had been telegraphed very clearly what was going to happen here, and it actually arriving, that didn't make it land any softer.
No.
Joining us today, senior editor and reporter at The Lever, covering money and influence, Andrew Perez. You've seen Andrew before on Left Wrecking. Thanks for joining us again, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
So there's one reason I was really excited to have you on today, and we'll talk a little bit about another piece you have on Joe Manchin and health clinics in West Virginia. But the Supreme Court's going to be on people's minds this weekend, and there's going to be a lot of bluster in the media about the legal doctrine side of this, and maybe we should have competing legal minds posit whether this is consistent with the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. Or, talk of a divided nation, people 50-50 split apart. And I will just say, I know people I'm from North Dakota, I know single issue, anti-choice voters. But from my perspective, the most important thing to emphasize is the conspiracy of money behind the judiciary in America right now. And so if you could just tell us a little bit, you have this article here, Dark Money Led to This Moment. How did dark money lead to this moment?
Sure. So conservatives have been building a dark money network filled with anonymous cash. We have no idea who's been funding it. They've been building a courts network since 2005 with the idea of overturning Roe v. Wade and chipping away at the regulatory state in general. So if you look at what happened with this case, so this dark money network led by Leonard Leo at the Federalist Society, his network also funds the Republican attorneys generals, who then are the people who actually brought this case before the Supreme Court, the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization case. They have basically helped install these judges on the court. Leonard Leo was Trump's judicial advisor. He helped pick, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. And then, he led this dark money network that helped build a campaign to confirm them. And then, he funds the Republican AGs who bring these lawsuits to try to get to the court. And in this case, it was the Mississippi AG, but she had a lot of backing from the rest of the other Republican AGs as well. And they've also then funded a bunch of organizations that are then filing separate amicus briefs, which are friend of the court briefs, effectively lobbying in favor of this of this decision and providing some legal justification for it.
It sounds an awful lot like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is basically set up to have boilerplate reactionary legislation that different state legislatures can just submit, take off the internet and submit. Is that a decent comparison?
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's pretty relevant. I think ALEC is part of the state policy network. So are a bunch of these Leo groups. It's not the truth is Sheldon Whitehouse has really been kind of beating this drum about what he's calling this strategy of a flotilla of amicus briefs. And it's, you see it pretty consistently. It's not just in these cases before the court, but it's very, very apparent in the cases, both, this abortion case, the EPA case that's still set to come. And then even the Miranda rights one where, the Republican AGs helped support that as well. So it's a really consistent pattern.
Right. And so you break down two prongs of this, which is one is the placing of the judges itself. And then the other is, like you say, this amicus brief thing. Can you just give us a little history of the Trump judges who was behind them?
Sure. So Leonard Leo helped select them. And again, he's a longtime Federalist Society executive, and he actually supposedly helped pick both John Roberts and Sam Alito too. During the Bush administration. And so, you'll see the Judicial Crisis Network is sort of the central, public facing arm of this group. You'll see their ads, you'll see them on TV. Like they get invited on as like sort of judicial experts on like ABC and CNN, even though they're not just like experts, right? They're like leading the campaign to really install these people. Um, and so, they're also then funneling like Judicial Crisis Network has long been funneling money to other groups too that are then that are helping build an echo chamber to support those judges' nominations. Creating this kind of appearance of broad-based support for some pretty extreme judges.
Could you just give folks I mean the difficulty obviously is that there is this like shadow network, but some of the forces that you're aware of and some of the players that you're aware of, I mean, where is this like motivation coming from? Is it solely to weaken the regulatory power of the state? Is it to bolster, evangelical movements in the Republican Party? I mean, it's just one of those things where there are plenty of people, like I'm just speaking here in Texas, right, who are very, very anti-choice here. But you look at even like the radical laws that were passed here, even with Republicans, were fairly unpopular. Like being against abortion, even with Republicans in Texas, is not like the majority position that it might seem when you see what's playing out here. And I'm just curious if you have any insight as to like what is behind this big money push here.
Sure. Well, so there's some reporting that so Leo is like a conservative Catholic. Most of the
Mhm.
people involved in this are conservative Catholics. But basically, the reporting is that Leo, decades ago, basically realized that Republicans had lost the broader culture war. I'm not sure if that's entirely the case today, but that was sort of the motivation behind it. Was like, we've lost culturally. Here's one area where we can really affect change, and that's by stacking the courts. And they're doing it with the Republican Party, like they're working hand in hand with them, right? Like the Republicans are also, equally supportive of like maximalist strategies. So it's they have a really receptive audience and a team they can really work with. You see it on the Democrats have their own kind of dark money network that literally only formed like a few years ago, like
Mhm.
during the Trump era. That's when they decided they really needed their own network. But when you have senators like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema who don't really care for anything that might look like party unity, they just don't care about it. They're freelancing all the time. It means that money, like, it doesn't matter how much you have, it's worthless. It doesn't do anything. You like this team is really like not just raised the money and put the money in, but they've like created a strategy for like really operationalizing it.
And I just want to add as a side note here, about this decision and this entire movement is like something you said there. I think is really clear, right? It's like donors going into this are saying like the right has lost the culture war, and I think it's very fair to say like I wonder how true that is, but understand like where that kind of thought process and the action that's following with it is inherently anti-democratic, right? Saying like we've lost the people, so we need to find a way to subvert democracy, subvert the ballot, so that we can get the things that we want into play.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you look at this court, like a bunch of the judges were also picked by presidents who lost the popular vote. So it's a fundamentally anti-democratic court. And I mean, you even see that in the decisions today, right? Like, or in the abortion decision, where they basically are like, we can't be influenced by public opinion.
Hmm.
It's a blatant, just middle finger to the actual people of this country.
And like, I mean, not to editorialize too much, but it's just like this is one of those things I think is important. Like this stuff should horrify you, one, on just the general assault on human rights and people's personal sovereignty, but two, just like recognizing that there is extremely organized and powerful forces out here that are effectively saying we want to take important decisions outside of the public arena and make those use the parts of our government which are the least responsive or affected by politics as the vehicle to do that. Like that's a very, very frightening moment, not just because of what it's doing right now, but what that really does mean for the future is taking away our freedom and our ability to be able to influence politics through this kind of shit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, definitely. And I guess I should like emphasize these groups are funded by like tens of like donations that really come in like $10 million at a clip,
Hmm.
10, $20 million. And when we say dark money, it means like we'll never know the donors unless they, for some reason, just out themselves, or if it was made by like another nonprofit that eventually has to disclose. That's like does not happen with these groups. It really happens very rarely that you ever find any money coming in. And if you look at, we were able to trace some of the money coming into the Judicial Crisis Network and its new parent organization called the Concord Fund. But the only money we've found coming in is from other dark money groups, including one run by Leonard Leo. Leo has this group called Rule of Law Trust that literally just gave $20 million to them, or $21 million in 2020. And that group is purely funded by literally only donations above $20 million, like between 20 and 35 million. And we have no idea who brought it. And like, quite obviously there are very, very, very few people in this country who can afford to do that. There's very few businesses that can just drop that on court fights. So, it's a real kind of whodunit as to who funded this, but that it's coming from just obscenely wealthy interests.
Yeah, let's just do an imaginative experience. Like, let's say you are one of these extremely rich Catholic freaks that wants to control, women and a whole bunch of other things. And you interface with the Concord Fund or the 85 Fund. Walk us through that experience a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I think my general understanding of how this money comes in is that it's given specifically by sources that will never have to disclose it. Like it's designed intentionally, right? It's not like they're not like having the money come from like some family foundation. Like it all gets passed into other groups that then are going to keep your identity fully secret. And then these groups also fight to make sure that donations are kept fully secret too. And so that's I think that's probably the promise, right? It's like, you guys are used to getting a 501c3 tax break. You're used to being able to deduct that. Here you can't. And because it's a more important fight than that, right? Like this is a more important fight to overturn Roe v. Wade than your tax break. I think that's probably the pitch. Alternatively, the other way that it might work would be pooled money from big corporate lobbying groups. But I have no intel there. But I think that's the other way you might do it, because a lot of those groups just don't have to actually disclose when they give out money to certain organizations, so long as they can say that it's like supporting the whatever their business interests are.
Right. I mean, I just think of like the DeVos family, or these like sort of families that have a whole bunch of wealth and like, I mean, man, and this is how you get it active.
Well, I mean, just saying, like, again, like, this has been something that I've been talking about for a long time. Is like, I hope it's no longer a personal crusade and other people start joining up on this against like the overpowered and supercharged court. That like one of the things that you have to factor in here, as you know, Andrew, is Citizens United, which beyond like being a really frightening expansion of the power of money in politics, it seems now, especially looking back at it from this moment, was a way for the judiciary to sort of continue, like to allow even more of this supercharged money that was entering into that system of government to happen, right? Unilaterally decided that wasn't something that was popular with the American public, right? And that really opened up the door for the system right now, because I'm sorry, like the appeals courts in this country, the higher courts, the higher up you go, the more and more reactionary it gets. And that's created in part through political failure, certainly, but also because there is this very powerful moneyed interest that is trying to support these characters.
Yeah. Well, and actually, so I think, I mean, it's my understanding that this kind of spending, like on these judicial confirmation fights, and also even just like policy fights generally, they're all considered like issue spending rather than like actual attempts to influence politics. And that's a specific carve out from a Supreme Court case like decades ago. I think it's Buckley v. Vallejo. That's like where they kind of built in this, ability to crush, basically to crush democracy. But sorry, I forgot what I was going to say there.
Well, let's for folks interested in this Dobbs case specifically as a case study for how this two-pronged approach. I mean, I guess we understand how the judges got there now, but how that money sorts of backs up and creates the formation behind these.
Sure. So in the Dobbs case, it's filed by the Republican AG in Mississippi. Um, the Republican AGs are literally their chief financier is like Leonard Leo's Concord Fund, and it has been for going on about a decade or more, or maybe slightly less. But they've been the chief financier of it since at least 2014, and then what you see, so you see other Republican AGs file briefs in support, and you also see, the Concord Fund and the 85 Fund, another Leo group, donating a ton of money to groups that are getting active, filing more kind of friend of the court briefs here, like the Susan B. Anthony list. This group called Advancing American Freedom, which is the new group from supposed American hero Mike Pence. Then there's groups like the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, Concerned Women for America, the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Family Research Council. A lot of these groups get funding from some other kind of, billionaire foundations, like, for instance, the Koch Foundation, the Charles Koch Foundation. But, you know, these groups, these Leo groups, have been really, really big financiers of them too.
Yeah, and I just think that's important for people to know and like a sort of understanding to get out widely that it's not just like these court cases randomly come up and right they are spear points sort of directly sort of produced to create a political a court a political end basically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when the court took up this abortion case, everyone's like, that's a ridiculous case because like it flies fully in the face of established precedent, right? Like the only reason for them to take it up was to strike down abortion laws because the Mississippi law that was being defended here is like a really really extreme law. Where they would ban most abortions at 15 weeks of pregnancy. It contains no exceptions for rape or incest. Um, Basically, the only way you can get an abortion now, like at least according to the Mississippi law, is that you need to be dying. Like it needs to be a matter of life or death. So it's a really really extreme law. It was designed to challenge Roe, and that's why the court picked it up.
And it's a similar thing, we talked last time you were on, we talked about this EPA case that I believe we're expecting to come down the pike. And, your article will link to it, but it outlines the exact same sort of, formation of where there's an agenda behind these just interesting judicial questions that are posed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that case was filed. I mean, it's sort of a consolidated case at this point because it was a many many challenges to it. But so that case was led by Patrick Morrisey, the West Virginia Attorney General, and it has 17 other Republican attorneys general backing it. And then if you look through the people who are filing amicus briefs, the new Civil Liberties Alliance gets a bunch of money from this Leo group. So and in that case, it's designed to really really chip away at the government's ability to at all respond to climate change. It basically, says like the idea that conservatives are trying to propagate is that the government can't respond to the federal government. The administration cannot regulate greenhouse gases, and in fact, what actually has to happen, Congress can't delegate that authority. What needs to happen instead is that Congress needs to pass individually a new law tackling every pollutant every time they decide we need to address one. So it a ruling there, if it's expansive, can really, really strike down the ability of not just the EPA to regulate climate change, but like every federal agency's ability to function. Like it's really designed to take power away from them, to put it to Congress, so that Congress can obviously do nothing.
Right. I mean, unless you got anything more on the SCOTUS stuff, I think that's a good place to
Yeah.
leave it. Just preview. You got this other story here, which I think is very interesting, on the RAM clinics in West Virginia. What is a RAM clinic, and why is it in Joe Manchin's backyard?
Sure. So remote area medical clinics have been around for a couple decades now. They were started originally to help serve communities in like really remote areas, like in the Amazon rainforest. They quickly realized that there was a lot of need in the U.S. They started getting a lot of requests to help out here, and so what they do is they create these pop up clinics that are like 2-3 day events, and they go where they're invited by like community health groups that are then going to help organize both volunteers and just find doctors, dentists, optometrists, and so what they do is they're treating people free of charge. They expect to mostly treat people who are either uninsured or underinsured. But you go to these clinics and you see just like a real cross section of America. Like they are people of all ages, people who do have insurance, like people who are on Medicare, people who are on Medicare Advantage plans. And the reason you're seeing that is just because dental care in this country has been carved out from the in vision have been carved out from the rest of healthcare. Like your health insurance just doesn't cover it, and even if you have a Medicare Advantage plan or a private dental insurance plan, they're usually really kind of weak, kind of meager. Like they only really might cover like an annual cleaning, and everything after that you're going to be subject to some kind of cost sharing, or you're going to be paying above a certain cap. Like you'll be responsible for everything, and it's usually only like $1,000 or $2,000. So that's why you see these clinics. And we went to the one that was in Joe Manchin's backyard. It was literally like 10-minute drive from his house.
And I mean, I will link to this story as well, but I mean, it really like puts the idea that we just carve that out. So we have to have people walking around with teeth that are cutting into their jaws, and they're priced out of care is just sickening and obscene. And I mean, it's a good vision of like what we should be doing for folks, and showing up with non-judgmental, I mean, care for them. It's a great story. So I encourage folks to read it. Well, Andrew, thanks again. We'll have you back. Hopefully not on such a bleak day, but we appreciate all the work you do, and the folks at The Lever.
Thanks, I appreciate it.